Before you fix curriculum, fix communication. Hi there, I'm Stan Baker, one of the co-hosts of Circle Forum, along with Shelley Steele and Steve Young. We're retired educators from Ontario, Canada, who worked in restorative practices in adjacent school boards, and now we're working with restorative practices in coaching principals. Our podcast guest this episode is Tre Gammage, owner of Strengths-Based Training, helping superintendents build high-performance leadership teams. Left unaddressed, staff conflict leads to absenteeism, burnout, and leadership turnover. Addressing it earlier builds healthy schools.
This episode is brought to you by the word communication, from Latin meaning to share or to make common. Originally, communication meant more about creating a mutual understanding rather than sending messages. While it meant the passage of goods, people, or even disease from one place to another in ages past, it has now come to mean the exchange of ideas and emotions. In schools, communication is enhanced by a shared use of commonly understood words and concepts. Email Stan for more on the how-to using restorative practices.
Our website, www.Restorative.ca, is for principals who deal with conflict, who want to make things right, and who want to make it about kids learning. If this is already making you start to feel a little bit overwhelmed, send me an email to stan@restorative.ca. And now let's join the podcast discussion now let's join this podcast discussion with Shelley, Steve, and me, Stan. My experience has been that people basically avoid conflict, and that often the conflicts between leaders and staff will increase the number of staff absences and will increase the number of days that principals either take off or finally leave the profession. What's been your experience with conflict and wellness and people staying at school?
Yeah, it's all those things. It's uncomfortable. So the reports that I use will give us a section that says conflict and behavior. And it'll bring up a couple scenarios. So there's some people that have a long fuse, and this bothers them, that bothers them, that bothers them, but it's not until the umpteenth time that they actually show it. And when they show it, it's explosive, and you're like, man, that person's crazy. And there's other people that they have a very short leash. And when they express themselves, I think you all may be able to tell from me, I'm very emotional when I speak. I have a lot of character in the way that I present. Some people will take that very personally. And when I get to speaking with more enthusiasm, if you don't know me or you miss the first 10 minutes of our conversation, you might think that I'm arguing with somebody, but I'm just very passionate. And so depending on when I don't know that, if that's me, and I'm talking how I talk, but you're uncomfortable with when people raise their voice and get too direct with you, now we're in conflict. And because we're in a staff meeting and there's 4 of us, and I didn't put time in the agenda to get your feedback or to get your thoughts, you're going to talk to your neighbor instead of talk to me. And so he was talking about me. I know he was, because last week in the staff meeting, he walked by and he saw me do this in the hallway. So I know he's talking about me. He should have told me about it. And so now we've got this dialogue going your way, and that spread to 2 and 3 and 4 more teachers. Nobody told me, but now that's spreading around the school. And now a teacher you talk to, I know you're treating me this way because you did Stan the same way. What did I do to? So it just becomes a perpetual cycle. And so that's why I stay step 0 too, because when we can put, the main thing I have folks do, if we just have 2 hours, I have you do a communication summary. And so it looks at your communication preferences. Do talk to me like this. Don't talk to me like that. Here's my strengths, my tendencies, the things that I'm working on. So my suggestion is, before you go talk to Stan, look at that piece of paper and make sure you're ready to have a win-win conversation. And so, yes, I absolutely see that. And I mentioned earlier, the things that I measure is confidence, strengths utilization, and well-being. And so I measure confidence because when you're confident, that means you're typically using your strengths. When you use your strengths, you feel better in the workplace. And so what Gallup data shows me is that people that use their strengths every day are 8% more productive and 15% less likely to quit. So when you're confident and you know you're using your strengths, you might feel better to speak up and say, "Hey, Tre, were you talking to me like that? I didn't really like how that made me feel." "Oh, got it. You weren't talking to me like that. You were just saying it in general." "Okay." Now I have the confidence because I know who Tre is and how he shows up, and I know who I am and how I feel. So you know how to find the right moment now to address your concern, whether it's in that meeting or in a one-on-one session, so that doesn't spiral into negativity and absenteeism, but we're able to nip it right where it's at. And that's nuance, and that takes time. That takes time.
We've each had quite a number of superintendents and supervisors in our various roles because we had system roles and the supervisors would constantly change. And so in one case, I gave my strengths profile to my new boss and it just went, psh. How do you help people who are aware of their own strengths deal with the fact that others don't really either care or aren't aware of their strengths? Like somebody's on with what you're saying, but their
Yeah.
supervisor isn't.
Yeah. Those are the application pieces. So to think about different learning styles, me handing a piece of paper isn't going to tell me much. But if we can walk through some scenarios, that may work. "Oh, tell me how a woo shows up in your role." And so I think that's what's different. I think even to your question earlier, Stephen, like how do you apply it? I've got this diagnostic, my top 5, my top 34 strengths, but what do I do with that information? And I think that's where the work comes in.
Yes.
And so I think there's a variety of ways, but I've been doing this 8 years now. And so it's second nature for me to think about these things and to apply them. But like literally in moments, being able to show us how this goes. And so I look at kind of different competencies. And so when folks do take Gallup, I still will give them a DISC assessment. So I think about DISC as the prescription. If Gallup is the diagnostic, DISC is going to give us a prescription to address and apply those things that we have. And so going back to a online workshop, we were actually setting quarterly goals as a group. This was a virtual meeting. And a guy showed up, and one of his low areas on his emotional intelligence assessment was emotional identification. And he said, "I don't have emotions. I don't feel them." I said, "Sir, that's not true. You might skip them, you might not acknowledge them, but you do have emotions." And he had a hard time grasping that. And Stan, we spent 10 minutes and we went through about 2 or 3 scenarios going through it. He still didn't get it at the end, but we said, "Okay, let's put a pin in it. I just want you to think about when things happen, even if it's in hindsight, what were you experiencing? Was it frustration? Was it anger? Was it surprise? What was it? What was it? And if you can't feel it right now, we need to get some more words so we can identify that." And so it's those nuanceical situations, if I may, that the gaps are bridged. Because if I give you an explanation from DISC, I just sound like the smart guy that's referring to research. But if you have a specific question and you have a specific statement or something you disagree with, I can tap into your world now and we can find the connection. But when I find the connection with you, if we're in a group setting, that's going to connect the dots for other people. Like that guy didn't have the emotional intelligence identification. In my recap call with the leaders, they were like, "Tre, thank you." Because even though he didn't get it, I know some other people needed to hear that. And so just having that dialogue as specific as it can with a challenging question can help us find that sense of understanding.
That's the power we found in the coaching calls that we do. Then when people are able to talk to us about really what's happening for them beyond the training and make it meaningful for them. And then that's when the training sticks and becomes part of their practice, is when we can talk about those nuances, or this is really how it feels for me, or what it looks like. Yeah.
Absolutely.
What strikes me in what you have been describing is that there needs to be some work that individuals do on themselves in terms of their self-awareness before you can implement any kind of program. You just fill in the blank of what kind of initiative you want to put in there. What kinds of things have people done after you've worked with them?
I love that. Great. I love these questions. These are very good. And to address the first part too, this is like pre-work. This is self-work. I already mentioned the research gaps. My first job before I took that residential high school role, I worked with a program called the Civic Education Project, and we did asset-based community development in neighborhoods around Johns Hopkins and Chicago University. We were on the south side of Chicago doing work. And the concept was using the assets, the tools, the talents, the resources that exist within a community to uplift the community, very similar to restorative practices as you saw. And so that's exactly the idea. Is I used to call it asset-based personal and professional development. Strengths just rings a little bit better. Strengths training rings better. But how are we using those assets? How are we leveraging your strengths and your tools to be more effective in your role, using those top 5 strengths of your natural gifts? And so what do people do after? I had a supervisor that said, hey, if this sandbox ain't working for you, get your own. And so I don't always see success as the team is working perfectly together and we have 100% retention. Because there's been moments when we do this training and people realize they don't fit. And they need to go somewhere else. And sometimes that's amicable, sometimes it's hostile.
Some of the most challenging teachers I ever worked with were ones that didn't understand their strengths or what they were good at. And so it was my job to say, look, let's see if there's something else that you are better at, because you're not happy doing this role. You're stressed, you're burned out, you're taking days off. And in many regards, finding teachers a different grade to teach or a different subject to teach. And all of a sudden they go, yeah, this is what I always really wanted to do. It's challenging to get people to come to that conclusion on their own. You have to kind of lead them to that. You can't tell them.
Yeah.
It's tough.
I think that's why I'm such a believer in assessment, because and particularly a DISC style assessment that's not telling you who you are. This is how people see you. This is how you show up. And this is how you answer these questions. And so when I have that piece of tangible information, firstly, I can cut through a lot of I can say emotion. So if I go back to a school setting and we think about one-on-ones with instructional coaches, and my feedback would say, hey, maybe the first semester, or maybe the first year, we just get to know the teacher. The bite back there would be, we're going to spend all our year getting nowhere. And I would say, yeah, because you don't have a structure for how the conversation should go. But if I am able to refer to a document, a Gallup report, a DISC report, an emotional intelligence report that says, hey, I noticed this bullet point says that. Tell me how this shows up in your day-to-day experience. Now we can speak directly to an issue, or I can, as a coach, identify this is the personal gap in your professional teaching. Let's address this so we can get to the pedagogy. But we're not allowed to take the time to focus on the person, or we are so smart that we won't use a tool. We'll just self-diagnose everybody and say, this is what's wrong with you. Fix or you out of here.
Oh, that's a great one. I love that one, man. I wonder, what you're doing now is not what you started out doing. Like, your practice has changed. What kinds of things have happened that you might call failures or successes that changed your practice over the 8 years you've been doing this?
For sure. Wonderful question. I think one is just the overall shift from social emotional learning to adult SEL to strengths. And so I think the difference is, what some folks don't know is that social emotional learning and emotional intelligence have the same founder in Daniel Goleman. Different competencies, but they mean the same things. And so I found initial success with charter schools, smaller schools, being able to provide supports for them. But I recognize, if you think about a product market fit from the business standpoint, people were bringing me in to solve student problems, which makes sense. And they were thinking of it within the framework of CASEL and adult SEL being step 3. My learning and understanding it in the gap, again, I'm solving this SEO problem. That's not your problem. You got a people issue. I need to fix this so we can get to that. And that's why I call it the step 0, because we have to address this, and that can't be the excuse as to why these other things fail down the road. And so that change was the main thing. Like I actually don't fit under the SEL umbrella, because if you follow a SEL framework, me saying step 0 when y'all saying step 2 is just opposed. We're just in opposition. So going to strengths, what that also helped was, I think I mentioned, when I used to call schools and say, hey, I'm Tre, I do adult SEL, I would get bounced from different departments. Oh, you need to talk to PD. You need to talk to this department. You need to talk to that department. Now that I say strength-based training, everybody wants to have a conversation. And so just that simple language, there's an understanding because of Gallup, I think, and because of StrengthsFinder and those tools, it's clear that this is adult focused. And so I think in this kind of season that we're in, it was a good time to pivot from SEL that is very politicized and in the news for America to strengths, which is universal and I think can't be diametrically opposed in the same way. That's made a big difference. And then the other piece was finding, like, what budgets are people using for my work? Title I, Title II, Title IV, school improvement funds. What is the actual outcomes that you all are looking to get from our work together? So understanding those pieces, and then feedback. So I'm always onboarding, satisfaction, recap calls. I'm always touching base. And so people give me feedback. My reports were 50 pages. Now they're 26, right? I'm getting smaller ones. Tre, how do we use this when you're not here? I've got 10 activities now that you can work on independently in small group or whole group. So being able to develop out a curriculum and framework and a system that is mine, more or less, and that fits within this strengths concept rather than a concept that doesn't fit the way that my brain is thinking about it from an SEL to a strengths lens.
What really resonates with me is, for restorative practices anyway, and each of us certainly has been involved in that, is that our school boards focused on restorative practices for kids. And what was always a sense for me anyway was that let's get this restorative practices right for the adults, and then the kids will follow along.
The kids were never the problem. It was the adults surrounding the kids that was the challenge. Whether it's the teachers, the parents, community, the kids are who they are. It's how we as adults work with them that will determine success or failure. We need to see where they're at. We need to figure out if they're understanding what their strengths and weaknesses are and how they can better work with the students in their charge.
Same. I'll add on to that, and I'll say find a way to use your strengths every day. Again, the things that I look at with Gallup, you use your strengths every day, you're more productive and less likely to quit. And how do I find out my strengths? Take an assessment. There's the assessments that we're talking about. There's free assessments. There's low-cost assessments. Get the awareness, because awareness alone makes a difference. And after you have that, you can determine what steps to take to apply those strengths for yourself and your team. And your school should have funds to pay for those types of things as well.
This is where I get really excited about this kind of training and these discussions. But I really liked your quote around that schools look like they're leaders. And I think that is just powerful in itself. You talk about giving something to people for people to sit in for a while. Just giving that and having people reflect on that for a while, I think would bring a lot of things up. I remember somebody sharing a quote that had done a lot of traveling, and I think it was a remote part of Africa they had been to. And the greetings that we would give each other when we come across each other is, how are you? The greetings when you would arrive to this community was, how are the children? Because the children really reflect how we're doing as a community. And I think that's really what you're talking about, Tre, there. And then, so how are we doing as for the kids? Yeah,
Very
thanks.
good. I like that.
Yeah.
I really appreciate how Tre Gammage sets it up with self-awareness, self-management, and emotional intelligence for the adults in schools as what needs to happen first before any curriculum or culture change. It's a shift to adult building and transformation that's reflected in the mindset and the wellness of the staff. That positively impacts student learning. So what do you think, and what resonated with you? What challenges do you face with adults, self-awareness or not, in your building? Fill in the comment link that's in the podcast description. It starts with us, the adults. Now, if you're struggling with adult conflicts in your school, send me an email to stan@restorative.ca and we can have a conversation about how to have those conversations.